Welcome to City Inside Out. Today's topic, major overhaul of the High Point Low-Income Housing Project. The Seattle Housing Authority is poised to redevelop the West Seattle complex, one of the three big projects created to house defense workers during World War II. We discuss plans for High Point, including whether all the current low-income tenants will be allowed back. Our guest is the manager of the redevelopment project. And later we talk with Richard McIver, chair of the Council's Housing Committee, which is keeping tabs on the High Point renovation. All that ahead after our news. A $200 million ballot measure for new and upgraded fire stations. That's what Mayor Nichols announced this week. Seattle's entire 33-station system needs a rebuild, he says, starting with the department's headquarters. The 75-year-old building in Seattle's Pioneer Square sits atop a liquefaction zone, which is a fancy way of saying it's quite vulnerable to an earthquake. Most of the other stations are seismically unsafe as well and otherwise need to be upgraded. If you can believe it, a recent study showed that only 2 of the city's 33 fire stations have sprinkler systems. The mayor hopes to put the measure on the fall ballot. However, some council members have wondered aloud whether the city and its residents are ready for yet another tax measure. 2 items to report about City Light. Greg Nichols this week announced an interim leader for the utility. He is Jim Rich, who for the last 8 years has been City Light's deputy for finance and administration. Rich will soon take over from Gary Zarker, who failed to gain council reconfirmation earlier this year. Announced at the same time was a 15-member panel to conduct a national search for the permanent City Light superintendent job. The mayor has decided not to include a member of the city council on that committee. Well, April 15th has come and gone, but before you think taxes can be ignored for a while, think again. The first wave of car tab increases for the new monorail will be sent out tomorrow. Better get used to it. The monorail tax is expected to last for the next 25 years. In other monorail news, more talk this week about the effect of designating the current Fifth Avenue line as a historic landmark. The existing monorail gained that status last week during a meeting of the city's preservation board. But just what is historic about the current line and what isn't? It's a bit tricky and was explained to the city council this week.
Features of the landmark to be preserved include the monorail cars and interiors, the concrete beams and pylons, the Seattle Center Station, and exclude the following: the Westlake Station, the concrete guideways, beams, and pylons built in conjunction with the Westlake Station alterations in 1988, the Sky Bridge to the Center House, the Seattle Center Administrative Offices, formerly the Allweg Building, exterior, interior, 1988 and later renovations, including the paving ramp and stairs on the exterior of the Seattle Center Station, the electrical vault building, and the 2 ticket booths.
Hey, but I kind of like the 2 ticket booths. Monorail planners say that the historic designation doesn't necessarily mean they can't take down the current structure. It does, however, make it harder. They will have to go through lengthy negotiations with the Preservation Board. Possible options are to locate the current monorail cars at a museum or some other spot to abide by the spirit of the historic designation. 2 Seattle police officers were fired this week. Their crime? Cheating on a department exam. The test is given periodically to determine who should be promoted to the level of sergeant. After a lengthy investigation, the 2 officers were determined to have shared answers. Police Chief Gil Kurlikowski says it's an isolated case and not indicative of widespread department dishonesty. Affordable housing in the heart of downtown? It actually can exist. Turns out the city has some surplus property near the Pike Place Market. Recently, it asked market leaders to craft a plan to develop affordable housing on it. This week, designs for the project were unveiled for council members.
The first floor will be some commercial uses, probably retail on the front and some storage in the back. The next 3 floors that you see each have 8 units of low-income housing on them, and this will be, as stated in your ordinance, for what's considered very low or extremely low income, which really is 30% of median income.
This week marked the beginning of roadwork season in Seattle. Like lots of other activities, road projects wait until relatively good weather comes around. On hand to mark the occasion was Seattle Mayor Greg Nickels. He can be seen here atop a truck that is grinding off the old surface of a street in preparation for a new layer of pavement. The city expects to spend $55 million this season on 130 street projects throughout Seattle. Were those really jaywalking tickets Seattle police were issuing this week? Yep, they were. Department officials say they are in a zero-tolerance mode about crime in and around Pike Place Market. Extra officers have been dispatched to that part of town for a time, and they seem to be targeting all kinds of illegal activity, from drug use to jaywalking. So beware. On now to our neighborhood roundup. Here's what we found of interest happening across Seattle this week. First stop, Belltown, where the last single-family homes in all of downtown will soon be reopened. This picture is of one of those homes taken back in 1916. The city purchased the 3 cottages a few years back. They are adjacent to the Belltown Pea Patch. 2 of the renovated homes will soon house riders, and one will be used as a community space. Uptown now to the Northeast Branch Library, which closed this week to make way for a big rebuild. It serves several neighborhoods, including Wedgwood, Ravenna, and Laurelhurst, and is the most heavily used branch in the entire Seattle system. The renovated library will open in mid-2004. It's the latest project to break ground in the citywide effort to build or renovate libraries across Seattle. This news from Ballard. The Coast Guard this week said it will conduct its own environmental review of the monorail project. Seems like an odd entity to worry about public transportation. However, federal law requires that the Coast Guard be part of the process, given that the Green Line will cross the Ship Canal in Ballard, as well as the Duwamish River on its way to West Seattle. Down now to South Lake Union, where there is growing disagreement between the mayor and some council members about job growth. Greg Nickels has targeted the area for nearly 20,000 new jobs, most in biotech. However, council members Licata and Conlin cautioned this week about whether that number is unduly high for the area. They say South Lake Union has already exceeded the city's job growth targets. They want to make sure other neighborhoods aren't getting overlooked by all the emphasis on job creation in that part of town. And this news relates to neighborhoods all over Seattle. The city's Street Side Garden Contest is coming in June. The mission, to find the most creative and best tended street side garden in all of Seattle. Eligible sites include traffic circles, curb bulbs, and medians. Do you have a beautiful island of green in your neighborhood? Contest entry forms are due June 1st. And finally, an award all of Seattle can be proud of. We were named one of the top 10 walking cities in the United States. The honor is given out by the American Podiatrist Medical Association. Those, by the way, are the doctors who take care of feet. The honor went to cities with especially good walking-friendly characteristics such as air quality, parks, and I'm not kidding here, how many licensed podiatrists are practicing. We now walk over to our City Inside Out calendar for the coming weeks. There is a spring cleanup in the International District on Saturday, May 3rd, starting at 8 a.m. Lots of walking that day, we suspect. Those wanting to participate should meet at Hing Hay Park. And on Monday, May 5th, there will be a City Council meeting about the redevelopment of High Point, a topic we will take up later in this program. A couple of public hearings to announce. On Tuesday, May 6th, the topic is dangerous dogs and whether the city should alter how it treats them. On the same day, there will be a hearing about permitting issues for restaurants and places that serve alcohol. If you would like more information about any of these events or topics we discuss on this program, we direct you to our website at www.seattlechannel.org. And finally today, the Pacific Chorus Frogs. No, we're not talking about a new 4-part musical group. We are, in fact, talking about those riveting rascals. Roll audio. That, my friends, is the sound of thousands of frogs in Pritchard Park down in Rainier Beach. They are called chorus frogs because of what they do, sing. They are only 1.5 inches long, but their arias can literally drown out traffic. It happens in the spring during mating season. The loudest frog typically gets the girl. Breeding usually slows down by June, as does the chorusing. And that's it for today. Stay tuned up next for the news, rather. Stay tuned up next. We tackle the redevelopment of High Point, how to mix low-income rental housing with higher-income owner housing. The manager of the project joins us, and later a view from the council about High Point. Richard McIver visits. This is City Inside Out. We're back in a moment. We now welcome Tom Phillips. He's with the Seattle Housing Authority and manager of its High Point redevelopment project. Thanks for being here. Quickly, what is Seattle Housing Authority?
Seattle Housing Authority is actually not part of the city government. It's a separate nonprofit corporation that's created by the state.
And you're accountable to the city? You're accountable just to the people, I guess.
We're accountable to our Board of Commissioners. Our Board of Commissioners is appointed by the mayor and the city council.
You're watched by the city.
We are watched by the city.
The three quote-unquote garden communities, of which High Point is one of, the other two being Rainier Vista and Holly Park, were built during the war for what purpose?
Right. They were built as worker housing for the airplane workers in the shipyards. That's what their purpose originally was.
For literally defense workers?
For defense workers, and they did a fantastic job as housing in 1942.
And then they transitioned, and Seattle Housing Authority picks them up in the late 40s or sometime after the war.
Right. They became public housing at that stage.
Serving really some of the lowest income people in the whole city.
Right, right.
The idea to redevelop in High Point is the third of really the three projects to be redeveloped. What's the philosophy behind it? What have you done at Holly Park, Rainier Vista, and what will you be doing at High Point?
The idea is these are now obsolete garden communities. The infrastructure is falling apart. The housing is no longer really has a lot of problems with it. And we looked at, can you just remodel it and save a lot of money and do that? And it just wasn't practical to do that. So the idea is, here's an opportunity to actually create a new community and really knit what was really a separate kind of stigmatized project into the rest of the Seattle fabric. And in High Point, where and all the other communities, we're creating new streets, new community facilities, and make it part of the rest of West Seattle. So the idea is, you come back in 10 years, you don't identify these as projects. These are just Seattle neighborhoods.
And an important component of that is to mix up the income levels. In other words, you're not just rebuilding and making it look less like a project and more like a neighborhood, but it won't just be for the very low income.
That's right. At High Point, for example, roughly 30% of the total units when we finish redeveloping will be for very low income households, and then there'll be a little high income units for a little higher income, and then a lot of the units will actually be for sale units for anybody who wants to buy, market rate buyers. And what we do, and it's hard to explain, that the Housing Authority, whose our mission is beyond just providing low-income housing. It's providing a whole environment for people with low-income housing, who are with low incomes, and to promote self-sufficiency. So we believe that it's important to give people the opportunity to live somewhere where they're not stigmatized by where they live, but live in a very good environment, and provide training so they can get what they're interested in terms of and live in a place that they like to be, where they like to be.
This is being driven by the federal government and money for these kind of things. I believe it was Chicago, the Cabrini Green project that kind of started this wave of redeveloping these kinds of projects.
Well, it came out of the Clinton administration and actually it started even before that with Jack Kemp looking at under the first Bush administration, looking at what to do with obsolete public housing that really doesn't work, and this idea
concentrated projects.
That's right. Yeah. So in the East Coast, the vision people have is knocking down Pruitt-Igoe or Cabrini Green and making a lower density, more functional community. Here, because of what we have, we're actually able to redevelop and increase the density by bringing in buyers and that helps finance the whole redevelopment. The federal government's contribution is actually a small proportion of what's needed to make the economics of the whole redevelopment work.
And you have committed, though I don't think the federal government requires, that everyone who is now at High Point, and this goes for your other two projects, but for today we'll keep it on High Point, you have committed to keeping the same number of units. 716 units is the number of low-income people being housed over there. You're going to house that many in the future.
Right.
Under the redevelopment plan.
There's two things. We guarantee that if people live at High Point when we got the federal grant, that they can come back as long as they're in good, in compliance with their lease. They can live in High Point in the future, and that we will replace on a one-to-one basis every low-income unit that's at High Point. We'll replace a good share of it at High Point, 466 of those, and the rest we will actually build smaller apartments or buy apartments throughout the city. So we will make sure that there's the same number of units for people below 30% of the median income available when we finish as there was when we began.
Not all will be at High Point.
That's right.
Why not? Why not create 716 at the same place you're taking them away?
We think there's a problem with too much concentration. We think there's a problem concentration of too many high-income people or too many low-income people in one place. So we think to create a healthy community, it's important to mix the incomes. So that's why we're creating 466 units of very low-income units housing at High Point. Then there's so it goes up. There's some rental units for a little higher income, and then there's the for sale units and some affordable for sale units. So there's a real mix of housing opportunities there.
And you're just starting, breaking ground, I think, this fall or this summer. Really.
That's right. Once we get the city council approval, we're starting in earnest. Mm-hmm.
There is a stigma associated with these garden communities, which is exactly the philosophy you're trying to reverse.
Right.
How, however, do you get people of higher incomes who want to own their places to move into, quote unquote, these stigmatized project communities?
Right. Well, Seattle's a wonderful place. As a Seattle native, there are a lot of people in Seattle, and we've talked to people who have moved into our communities, and we've talked to people in focus groups. They are interested in living in diverse communities, and if they are comfortable with the idea that we will be good managers of the rental affordable units, that they're comfortable moving into next door or on the same block or in the same neighborhood of people with very low income. That happens all over Seattle. So people really, it's our experience, don't have a problem with that.
You sold out everything you had in Holly Park?
First phase, we've sold 148 units, and we're well on our way in the second phase selling the houses there.
Who are the kinds of people and the population be served now in a place like High Point?
Yeah. High Point is very much the average income is about $10,000.
It's way below even 30% of median
that's right.
income.
We have a very high percentage of immigrant populations from earlier, the Southeast Asians, a lot of Vietnamese and Cambodian families, and more recently East Africans families. When we have a community meeting where it's important that we convey a lot of information to our residents, we need 8 different languages, translators so we can communicate effectively.
I mean, it's that diverse.
It is that diverse, yes.
But you're here to say that you've committed anyone who's at 30% of median income or below, I mean, the very, very low-income people that came here, they're trying to get work, they don't have any money, they will be allowed in High Point in the future and or a replacement unit that may be off-site.
That's right. Well, actually, if they lived at High Point 2 years ago, they can come back. They can come back to High Point, and we've guaranteed that. And actually, through the construction, there's 40% of the people who are able to stay there. And this is why this is very different from the traditional or the old urban renewal. Or old urban renewal
30 seconds.
Took away all the housing. Here, we're keeping a core of a community, and 40% of the households get to stay there.
So there'll be a continuity at High Point, even though it's going to undergo a huge renovation.
It's going to be a very exciting place for people to live.
Tom Phillips, thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
Stay with us. Up next, Councilmember Richard McIver. He's head of the Council's Housing Committee overseeing the High Point redevelopment plan. We're back in a moment. We now welcome Richard McIver. He is chair of the council's Housing Committee. Thanks for coming in.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Maybe overstate your case. As I closed the last segment, I said you are charged with overseeing the High Point redevelopment project. I don't know if that's quite right. How do you see yourself vis-a-vis the housing authority in this project?
It is clearly a housing authority project. I think our job is to look at the land use and to create the environment in which they can develop this mixed income new community.
And you keep tabs on them, in effect.
Yes.
How are they doing?
I think they're doing very well. There's been a little slowness in Holly Park Phase 3 in getting some of the replacement units developed, and those are units that were supposed to be done via other nonprofits. I think just getting the packages together have been a little slower.
I mean, off-site replacement
Off-site
units.
replacement, correct. But I think we have to understand the purpose that we need to do this. Those houses are functionally obsolete. They're beyond their economic life. And I think we can expect that the federal government is moving toward eliminating the subsidy for public housing from their budgets. I don't think we could afford to maintain those existing units in public housing at our own expense.
What's the government going to do? You think you won't get?
I expect that they will slowly eliminate the subsidies they provide for public housing. And in place, what you'll have to do is have the mixed income communities so that the higher market rate stuff will begin to then offset some of the costs of the subsidized stuff, and you'll have an independently, financially feasible development.
And is that the status of, for instance, the New Holly and the idea of High Point, is that they become self-financing?
I believe that's ultimately the status that the federal government is looking for, yes.
Which is part of the, I mean, it's not just, so mixing it up doesn't just give you a nice diverse community, it also helps it financially.
Economic diversity.
Why not, I asked this of Tom Phillips, but why not replace all the units on site? If the people chose to live there at one point, let's just take High Point here, why do some of the units get replaced off site?
I think because you're replacing some of the units with market rate units, so they're not all subsidized units. You'll have the mixed income communities, and you wouldn't have that. You'd have higher densities than the communities would want to have, the surrounding communities would want to have, if you put all of the units right back in place.
And where are the other units going? For instance, the High Point replacement units that won't be on site, a couple hundred I think it is,
Right.
Where are they going to go? Are they going to be in West Seattle or nearby, or is there a provision for how you oversee that?
They'll be scattered throughout the city. We would expect that some of them will be in West Seattle, but they'll be throughout the city.
And I assume High Point residents, what, do they get the first right of going into those?
Well, I don't know if they'll have first right of going into them. They'll have first picks of their choice of where they want to go in the relocation. Now, whether or not from there there's a second relocation that they have a priority to, I don't know.
Was it the council's decision to require one-to-one replacement? As I understand, it wasn't required of the federal money, which is really doing the lion's share of this redevelopment.
No, it was not required of the federal money. I think we have to look at how we use our public housing dollars. Most public housing programs are really organized and set to use very dense East Coast and Middle West communities that are dense housing. We are able to make them work out here with much less density, with other costs, and our costs are pretty much equal. But I think that what we want and have a sensitivity to in this city is the housing of low-income people. So it's been through the community. I mean, people like Mr. Fox, through the council, who have urged that we have a one-to-one replacement so that we try not to have any net loss of units.
Mr. Fox is John Fox, the head of the Displacement Coalition, for
Correct.
viewers who don't know. Who are the kinds of people who are living in a place like High Point? And is it meant to be a permanent home for folks, or are you hoping that they transition out of that it becomes a starting point, not an ending point?
I think it's been a little bit of both. Historically, it has been a starting point for immigrants who've come in, learned the language, learned the customs, found the jobs, worked their ways economically up through the steps and out of the communities and into the market rate community. I think there are those people who just don't have the skill sets or handicap or other disadvantages that do kind of get stuck in them. So we need places for that. What HUD has done nationally is try not to, again, create such dense developments. I think 12 to 20 units per acre is about what they were saying, I guess, when I was doing public housing.
And they want to, get that density. I mean, in Seattle, it's really increasing the density in some of these garden communities.
Correct. But even at that, it's not an over-dense community.
It's not going to be a high-rise Cabrini Green type thing in Chicago.
Which they just tore down.
Right. We were talking earlier before we went on about Yesler Terrace and this idea about sort of who goes through public housing, and there were really waves there. I mean, it's been used by different communities over different periods.
When you think about it, at one point, it became the Jewish resettlement during World War II. You know, we've had Asian immigrants who come out and now are living in Beacon Hill and Clear Out. I mean, think about this. The executive director of the Housing Authority grew up in Holly Park.
The current executive
Current
director.
executive. Yeah, Harry lived down there.
As you see this, I mean, as you oversee kind of your role in the council, people get confused about what's SHA and what's the city.
Correct.
What is the city doing with low-income housing, and how does that sort of relate to SHA and what they're doing?
Most of what the city does is oversee the Seattle Housing Levy. You know, that's about $180 million that our citizens for the last 4 times have voted to put money aside out of their pockets to make sure that other people get housed that don't have the same assets or the same incomes. They're low income, below 80% of median income. It deals with the homeless housing. So we do a lot of that. We also do an awful lot with the community development corporations who sort of hit that lower to mid range, 50 to 80% of median income. We work with nonprofits who do, you know, housing for people who have physical disabilities. We do nonprofits for housing people that need housing, permanent, stable places to live because of other disabilities, and the homeless.
But Seattle doesn't really own units.
No, we tend to, and think about this. I don't think you want us to own units. I mean, but what we become is the gap financing mechanism that makes the difference in the financial feasibility of a project. We also provide some operating funds ongoing. So for those people or units that have under 30% of median income, we may provide a certain amount of money in the way of operating costs per unit for up to 20 years. So we are, in fact, the subsidy.
SHA, on the other hand, owns and manages and runs units. Just about a minute or two left. What does it say? Do you worry about what it says when you go into these communities, the Holly Parks, the High Points, the Rainier Vistas, and start backhoeing down? It's not beautiful housing, but it's certainly someone's home. And you're taking it down and you're telling them you got to move at least for a while.
But then the other question is it worthwhile to have someone in a home that's a slum? And these units are well past their economic life. You know, you can put siding on them, you can put roofs on them. Structurally, they're still functionally obsolete.
And you think they're going to be better?
I think it'll be much better. I think the stigma will become from, quote, the projects. And I think that what you'll see is them connect up with the larger communities and be embraced by the larger communities.
With that, we close. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Richard McIver is a member of the City Council and chair of its Housing Committee. And with that, we close. We thank you all for watching. On behalf of everyone here at City Inside Out, especially our talented studio crew, I'm C.R. Douglas. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Hi, I'm Nick Licata. This stuff's really good. Seattle Channel. Gotta watch it.